So let's start with the basics of numbers. The basic everyday fundamental words that we use to describe numbers. The things we need to know first of all. So we're going to cover some abbreviations that we use, and also we're going to look at the different words that we have for numbers and numerals in general. Then we'll look at some different idiomatic phrases, some expressions, and we'll run through the types of numbers. There's a bunch of different types of numbers mathematically and in the different ways that we use them. Then we'll have a look at counting, totaling, the way that we use numbers to arrive at sums and amounts. And we'll look at a little bit how we describe numbers, either very large numbers or very small numbers. So starting with the abbreviations, the most common one is this pound sign. And you would probably recognize it today as the hashtag sign from social media. But in fact, and still in the USA, but a little bit around the globe, this sign has typically been used to represent the word number. And confusingly, it's often called the pound sign, or the gate, or the hash. And it often precedes a number, and for example, on house addresses. But, you have number 7 on your shirt, if you're running a race, something like that. So although we know it more now as a hashtag, as a way of highlighting a phrase on social media, the origin of this pound sign, this hash, is in fact to represent the word number. Another common abbreviation is NO. So in the Latin, in the Romantic languages, we typically see the word numero or numeral to represent or to mean the word number, right? So NO is an obvious abbreviation for the word numero or number. But you need to be a little bit careful that it doesn't look like the word no. Now, typically in English, there's no real rules or really fixed protocol. So I just advise you to make sure that it doesn't look like the word no when you write it on the page. So sometimes we use a capital N, sometimes we put a full stop after the O. Even better is if you can raise the O into the superscript position, and ideally then you'd also underline it, right? Then it looks nothing like the word no, and then everybody knows straight away that's an abbreviation for the word number. So talking about the Latin word numeral or numero, we often use, of course, Latin or Roman numerals, for example, in bullet points or in other occasions where we want to represent numbers. So, for example, the lowercase Roman numerals, you might call it I, and 2, 3, and then 4 is represented by IV. These are very often used to separate out lists or items on an agenda, for example. Sometimes as well we use X to represent 10, C to represent 50, L to represent 100, and M to represent 1000. Also from the Latin word numerals, for example, numero, we get these adjectives, numeric or numerical, right? So for example, an alphanumeric code has alpha letters and numeric numbers together in the code. So we often see this for passwords or serial numbers, for example. Also with the word numeric, we often talk about numerical order. The numbers, The postcodes, for example, are in numerical order, right? So this means that they're either in ascending numerical order, so the number is going up with each line, or descending numerical order, where each subsequent number is lower than the one before. So what about the numbers 0 to 9 in particular, right? So the figures or the numbers, the characters we can say, but that also includes letters. So let's stay with the numbers, with the words numbers or figures. And this number word we often use here. For example, I have number blindness, I'm afraid. I have number blindness. I'm not good at numbers. I don't like using them, right? On the other hand, Janet is maybe our numbers person. So you could say, this person in the office, I'll speak to Janet. She's our numbers person. She's very good with numbers, right? Number also can mean the amount, right? I was surprised at the number of people at the event. You know, we have a number of things to discuss. Okay. Of course, numbers represent players in a football team, for example. You might say, what shirt number does she wear? A particular use of numbers, of course, is in addresses. We just mentioned the postcode. That's normally an alphanumeric code, so a mixture of letters and numbers, in the UK at least. But also, of course, your house normally has a street number or a house number. So it might be, you might live at number 34 or number 62. Occasionally, you might live at number 34A or 62B, right? We have that extra little distinction. But the key thing with house numbers is that very often on one side of the road, you have even numbers. So 2, 4, 6, 8, for example. And the other side of the road, you have odd numbers. 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, for example. So odd and even numbers we often associate with house numbers, but of course they're useful in many, many other areas. Another way to separate out numbers is to think of positive numbers and negative numbers. Of course, we generally deal with positive numbers, right? So the number 6, the number 7.207. 7.207, I should say. The number 2.5 or whatever. These are all positive numbers. We sometimes say plus numbers, and you can sometimes write this with the plus sign and then VE afterwards. Plus VE, positive. Of course, a number like -1, -6, -204, -5.6, -72. These are all negative numbers or minus numbers. And we can sometimes write the minus sign and then VE to indicate negative. Now you'll see there are some different protocols for representing minus numbers. Generally, we put the minus sign in front of the number. But for historic reasons, because that sign in fact is not very clear often on photocopies or whatever, so there are some other ways of doing it. Sometimes we put the number in brackets, particularly in financial reports, accountancy or finance. You sometimes would put the number in brackets to show it's a minus number. And another way, of course, is to use red ink. This is why we talk about being in the red, meaning that you owe money, you have negative credit. So we sometimes put these numbers in red to indicate that it's a minus number. Another way of talking about minus numbers is to talk about sub-zero numbers. Now, this is, as far as I can see, almost exclusively for temperature, right? Either the weather or temperatures you might use in a laboratory. So sub-zero temperatures, sub-zero numbers when it's below 0. Here's another key term. This key term is the idea of whole numbers. Whole numbers or integers. So in this case, the G is a soft G, integers. And of course, whole numbers are numbers, if you like, it's 0.0, right? So something like 1, 1.0, if you like, 6, 204. These are all integers, they're all whole numbers. On the other side of the coin, we have fractions or decimals, right? So a fraction might be a quarter, 1/100th, 4/3, 33 and a third, right? Or a number like 1,534 and a half. All of these numbers, include fractions. They're not integers. So this second string of numbers here, a quarter, 1/100th, 4/3, 33 and a third, 1,534 and a half. All of these numbers are not integers. Also, we have the decimal numbers, right? 0.25. We could say a quarter, but we can say 0.25 to represent it as a decimal. So remember, I'm saying 0.25. It makes more sense in international English to talk about 0.25. Another decimal would be 0.01. Again, it makes more sense to say 0.01. 0.01, that's the same as 1/100th, but in a decimal notation. 1.333, right, or 1.33 recurring, right? So in this case, we have a point, not a comma, so it's 1.33 recurring. That means that the threes continue forever. And this, of course, can be represented by 4/3 or 4/3 in terms of fractions. Yeah, so 1.333, this is a number just over 1. But 1,333, that's now 1,333. And of course, that is an integer. That is a whole number. We have yet another way to divide numbers into two groups, if you like, and that's the cardinal numbers and the ordinal numbers. So cardinal numbers, for example, are 1, 2, 3, 4, 67, right? And ordinal numbers are first, second, third, fourth, 67th, for example. Now these ordinal numbers can be quite difficult to spell, and the cardinal numbers too, by the way. But because the ordinal numbers are so difficult to spell, in one of the other videos, we look at all the spelling of these words, and that also covers the spelling of the ordinal numbers and the cardinal numbers. What about this variable when we have x and then a little 5, again, as we said, in this superscript place? How do we talk about this? Well, typically we say x to the power 5. And 5 here is the exponent, the index, or the power, right? So we can say it's x to the power 5 or x to the 5th. And this 5 is the index or the exponent or the power. Now listen, there are lots of other difficult types of numbers or lots of other more mathematical ways of describing numbers, complex numbers, prime numbers, for example. They're outside of the scope of this session on basic terminology, so we need to cover those in a later video. So as promised, there's lots of different words we can use, right, to talk about numbers. We can use words like figures, the digits, the amounts, the tallies, a tally, the total. Let's have a look at figures. So first of all, you probably hear this in your office quite a lot. Somebody might say, can you send me the third quarter figures, right, before Tuesday? Send me the third quarter figures as soon as possible. I need the exact figures for the invoice. So in a business environment, in the office, the figures normally refer to profits, sales numbers, costs, survey results, tax rates, results, this kind of business number that's important, right? So we often talk about the figures in this case. But we also use the word figures as a more literal way of speaking about the exact number on the page, right? So for example, you might say, she earns a 6-figure salary, right? She earns a 6-figure salary. What does that mean? That means that her salary has 6 figures in it, 6 numbers, 6 digits in it. So a 6-figure salary must be at least 100,000, whatever the currency is, let's say euros. A 6-figure salary must be at least 100,000 euros and up to 999,999 euros. Be careful though, this causes quite a lot of confusion. Another way we use the word figure, particularly in reports, is to mean diagram. So you might see a line like, you can see the profit breakdown in figure 6. This means in diagram 6. So I've seen this cause some confusion. Figure very often refers to a number or a digit, so the digits from 0 to 9, or a number or a total. But it can also refer to a diagram. So figure can refer to a diagram and a shape, right? We say he's got a nice figure, for example, right? Or the racetrack is a figure of 8. It's a figure of 8 racetrack. It's in the shape or figure of the number 8. Okay. Now we also use figure to mean understand. I can't figure it out. I can't figure out where the error is. Go figure, right? Work it out. Go figure. So we often use the word figure as well to mean to work something out, to deduce something or to calculate something. So going back to these 10 numbers from 0 up to 9, like I said, we can call them numbers, we can call them figures. Probably the best word for these 10 characters is digits. So we very often use the word digits. Of course, it comes from the word for fingers. 10 fingers, 10 numbers, right? So we often talk about the digits from 0 to 9. So you might see on an internet page, your password must be a 4-digit number, or your passcode, I guess, in this case. It's not a word, it might be a passcode. It's a 4-digit number. You sometimes read that there has been double-digit growth, right? Double-digit growth. So that means more than 9% growth. It must be 10% growth and anywhere up to 99% growth, but typically it might be from 10 to 20% growth, I suppose. And of course, this is where the word digital comes from, as opposed to analog, to describe electrical ways of counting and showing numbers and doing things, such as using computers, right? Because in computing, we use the 2 digits of 0 and 1. So a digital equipment is an electrical computational equipment, and a digital display uses these numbers rather than some analog display, which might be, for example, the hands on a clock. And a digital display will say, 3 p.m., 3 for 3 p.m. instead of having the hands point in a certain direction. We have a bunch of words that mean to count as well. You won't be surprised to hear. So to count is the most obvious way of talking about this, right? We need to know how many people are in the office. Let's count them. But we can also use the word to tally. That's a word we often use. What's the tally? Let's tally up the number of people in the office, right? We also use the phrase to add up. It's a classic phrasal verb where the preposition up can go to the end of the clause, right? We need to add these numbers up. We need to add them up. These numbers don't add up, right? We need to add up the numbers. And you can also use the word to total. So total you might see more often as a noun. How much is the total, right? Or an adjective, what's the total cost? But also we can use it as a verb. We need to total all the costs and put it on the report. We totaled all the cases of theft in our shops in 2019. Right? We counted all the cases of theft. We tallied all the cases of theft. We added them all up. We added them all up. But of course, also the word amount is very useful. The amount was 1,236 cases. Remember, we're adding up the number of thefts, and maybe that the amount in the end was 1,236 cases of theft. Or the total was 1,236. Or that was the sum of the thefts. Or that was the aggregate number. The aggregate, when we added up all the months together, the aggregate came to 1,236. We can say the amount. You might want to say the total amount, right? To make it clear that this is the final number. This is not just the amount for June. It's the total amount for the whole time that we're looking at. Or the sum total, right? The sum total or the total amount. It's a strange quirk of English that we tend to put the adjective after the word sum in this sentence. The total sum works fine as well. Don't get confused with to sum and to add up. Don't then say to sum up. That means something different, right? You've probably heard in meetings somebody is used to sum up what's happened. That just means to give a resume. This has nothing to do with numbers or totals. So to sum up, very useful phrase, but it's not connected to numbers. To add up or to sum. Another word we sometimes use to talk about an amount is a quantity. Look at this table, which could come from an invoice. And you see one of the columns that go up and down, says QTY, quantity. How many items? How many items are we invoicing for? What's the amount of items that we're invoicing? So the word quantity and the word amount, we can use both or either of these words to refer to how many items, right? The countable number of items. Only the word amount can we use to say how much. How much does it cost? The price of something, we can't use the word quantity here. Price doesn't have a quantity. A quantity is always a countable amount of items. But with amount, we can always say, how much does it cost? Right? It costs $22.20. Here we can see we have a subtotal for item X of $9. And when we add that to the subtotal for item Y, we arrive at a total sum or a final total or a total amount, right, of $22.20. So we arrived at a total amount. How did we do that? By adding everything up. Again, we have lots of phrases for this. We calculated a total amount, right? To calculate, that's a great word. I need you to calculate the total amount. To do the sums, to do the maths, to crunch the numbers. We often talk about crunching the numbers, to run the numbers. We need to run the numbers to find out how many accidents we had last year. We need to work out the final cost of the invoice. We need to work it out. We need to quantify. Okay, so to quantify is to put a number to it, to work out how many or how much. We need to quantify the amount of accidents. We're not talking about, how good or bad something is. We just need to quantify it, just find the numbers. We need to compute. We need to calculate or compute the number of accidents. We don't these days use the word to reckon. You sometimes see it in more old-fashioned English. I think it's better to avoid it, because in modern English, to reckon has come to mean your opinion, what you think about something. So it really isn't the same as perfectly working out the exact number. So I would avoid using the word reckon in this meaning, although historically it is what it does mean. That is what it does mean. But now it's come to mean to give your opinion on something. So how can we characterize these numbers? Well, let's start with some very, very large numbers, right? You might say the costs were enormous. Right? The costs were gigantic. The size of this thing, it was gigantic. Mega is a prefix we often use to mean very, very big. The invoice was huge. There was a massive crowd. There was masses of people. There was a massive crowd. Immense also means large, very, very large. Coming down a notch, you might say, there was a sizable crowd. The costs were substantial, not gigantic, but substantial. Or maybe just considerable, right? There are a lot of people there. It's a considerable number of people there. Then we have these words like large, big. Of course, with numbers, we can talk about a long number. The more digits you have in the number, the bigger the number, right? So we can talk, it's a long number. A little bit shorter than that, or a little bit smaller than that, might be a medium-sized crowd, an average price, a reasonable number of errors. Maybe it's a mid-range car. The price is mid-range. It's not so expensive. It's mid-range. So coming from the average point of reasonable or mid-range and getting smaller and smaller, we can say, well, listen, it's a significant price. Okay, it's not maybe such a big price, but it's a significant price. It's non-negligible. We can't ignore it. There was a non-negligible amount of accidents, unfortunately. If your accident record is a little better, then you could say, well, we had a small number of accidents. Maybe now we're talking about a short number. And then getting very small, we can talk about tiny. There was a tiny crowd. There was a minute number of people there. That sounds a little bit strange, but at the other end of the spectrum, we have tiny, minute, minuscule. We can talk about nano. Nano has, of course, a very specific mathematical definition. I guess it's 10 to the power minus 9. But also we can use it just in general to mean very, very small. So small maybe that we could say it's insignificant, right? It's negligible. Before we said the number was non-negligible. It's a fair number. It's quite a lot of people. Now it's a negligible number, almost nothing at all. We sometimes talk about a number being vanishingly small. Finally, a quick word about these mathematical signs, which are so useful when we're comparing numbers. So, of course, we use the equals sign, We always use it in the third person singular, which, of course, means we put an S on the verb. because even if you have, let's say, 5 plus 4 equals 3 plus 6, you think, well, there's a 5 and a 4. Why are we using equals in the singular voice? The reason is that side of the equation equals the right side of the equation. So we consider everything on one side of this sign to be one item. So we have the equals sign. We can say is equal to, 5 plus 4 is equal to 3 plus 6. We can say 5 plus 4 is the same as 3 plus 6. Maybe we're saying 5 plus 4 does not equal 2 plus 6, right? We could even say 5 plus 4 is approximately 2 plus 6. Certainly we can say 5 plus 4 is greater than 2 plus 6, or is more than. So this sign we can use to indicate greater than, and we sometimes say more than. It's greater than or more than. And the opposite sign, of course, means it's less than or smaller than. So 5 plus 4 is greater than 2 plus 6, or it's more than 2 plus 6, or we can say it's bigger than, I guess, in normal language. And conversely, 2 plus 6 is less than 5 plus 4, or is smaller than 5 plus 4. And very often we combine this greater than or less than sign with an equal sign. So it's greater or equal, greater than or equal to, and less than or equal to. So that's a wrap for the basic expressions of numbers. There's a lot of terms there. They're all very useful. So worth maybe looking at that one again. And good luck recognizing these terms and using these expressions when you speak to your colleagues and other people in your life.